First impression was, oh, it's kind of lumpier and smaller and less majestic and inspiring than I expected. But then when you get to it and go and walk amongst it, it really is a scary place.
Hanging Rock is quite an ominous location. It's a real location, obviously. We used to climb it 2 or 3 times a day, and it was quite exhausting. Like, we'd go down for lunch, which I remember was always totally covered with flies.
I used to go there when I was a kid. We'd go for picnics and climb all over the rock, but it was only when going back to make picnic at Hanging Rock that I actually became aware of those faces in the rock.
I remember the goats on the rock, who some people said were manifestations of the girls. I don't believe that for a second.
I have never found the rock ominous. For me, it's always been about something else. It's mysterious, for sure.
And that first time, it really did almost overwhelm us. I mean, I think if it could have eaten us up, it would have then, because I don't think it knew what was about to happen to it.
Oh, in those days, picnic was the art in terms of Australian literature, because everybody who'd read it thought, wow, this is a good piece of writing, it's a wonderful story, and what a movie.
I took it home and started reading it at the kitchen table, and I think I was still there at 12 midnight. I put it down and I thought, that would make the most fantastic film. Peter said to me, look, you're terrific at finding things and creatively. And I said to him, yes, but I don't know the ropes. And so he suggested that Hal and Jim come in, and I was very happy.
Hal, my brother, and Peter worked together at Film Australia, and all of us became friendly.
We liked each other, and of course he was enormously talented, and everybody could kind of see that immediately. And he's, of course, a very charming man, fun to be around, funny. We wanted to make a feature film, and so we asked Peter to write a script.
It was called Johnny and the Vampires, and we tried to get finance for it, but no one seemed interested at the time. So he said, well, look, why don't you take a look at this script I've read, The Cars That Ate Paris.
And Jim and I looked at each other and said, well, why not? So we did it. Although I must say that when we made Cars That Ate Paris, I was a little taken aback, because of course we were convinced that Peter was talented, that how quickly the critics in Europe said, oh, this is a talent. We're in post-production on Cars, and Peter said, have you read the book? And we hadn't, then we read it and went, oh, wow, that's a great book. And he said, well, you know, I'm working with Pat Lovell and Cliff Green on a screenplay. Do you want to read the screenplay? And we said, yes.
Picnic had been developed to 2 or 3 drafts by the time we were asked to become involved by Peter. After some discussion and some further script work, we felt we'd got it to a stage where it was ready for financing.
And we'd had a good relationship on Cars That Ate Paris. It was hard to do, but we got it made. You know, we shot it in 4 weeks for a couple of $100,000. And so we had the kind of mutual confidence that we could get something done. Logistically, it was quite complicated.
Joan Lindsay was a one-off woman. She was incredible. She and Peter immediately were soulmates, I could tell.
I just remember her as being a very sweet, nice, older woman, but very strong. You know, there was a sort of an iron will about her, which was very attractive to be around, you know. And of course, it made us respectful of the work.
There was something about her that was, or metaphysical or of another world, and you always felt as though you were talking with somebody who had the most tremendous inspiration from somewhere and didn't quite know from where.
I was fascinated to hear that Joan Lindsay had dreamt the book over a period of, I think it was something incredible, like 4 weeks. And it was so intense an experience that she'd got up the next morning and written down what she dreamt.
You know, at the time in Australia, and it was, you know, the rebirth of the industry, everything was new. The only thing that was working were contemporary ochre comedies. So along comes this period film, and there were a number of voices out there that were saying, well, period films are never going to work.
As it turns out, we were swimming more against the tide than perhaps we thought.
The one thing that was said before the film and by the critics after the film that was a fault, was that it was a mystery. I have a view that one of the main reasons the film was a success is that it was a mystery.
And I said to my God, we've got to say somehow to the audience, picnic's real, because then you don't have to solve the mystery. So I remember ringing Peter the following day. I rang Jim and I rang Peter and I said, we've got to somehow say this is real, but we can't say it's real because we don't know whether it is real. So we agreed that literally on that call to put that legend at the front, white lettering on black, before the movie began, without sound. Of course, what that said to the audience, and tradition of filmmaking was, this is a statement of fact. We never said it was fact. We just presented it as fact. And of course, the audience came to believe, to this day, many of them, that it's a true story.
The rationalists amongst us want to know what happened. And I'm still asked, and I'm sure all my colleagues are still asked, what actually happened.
Everything begins and ends at exactly the right time and place.
People search for clues in the body of the film to see whether there is an answer lurking round. Of course there isn't.
I think part of the mystery is that although the girls disappear, they are in a way still there, or the qualities that they embody, particularly Miranda. They remain in our consciousness and sort of continue to live in our imagination, which underlines that sense of the eternal that I think Joan Lindsay's on about in some ways, that sense of timelessness.
I do agree that its mystery makes it timeless. I think it really resonates with people. I think the film touches on that part of people that recognises that really extraordinary things happen, you know, for no reason. And I think, too, there's something about that sense of nature, of being something you can't control, that something can happen in nature that is completely beyond us to do anything about, and there's no reason why it should happen to that particular person or that particular town, or it just happens.
We shot the film in 6 weeks, which was a week longer than we'd had on the Casa de Paris. So the pace was relentless. And for the poor director who carries the burden, this is a very fatiguing time. And Peter really had magnificent endurance, because holding something like that together is quite an exercise, quite a task, quite a feat.
Peter was certainly a man possessed during the making, and of course that's a great thing for everybody. If you see a director who's committed, then the crew's going to work that much harder and the actor's going to work that much harder.
I think Peter's got the ability to collaborate with people to actually inspire them to get the best work out of them, because he's such a calm person with such a great sense of humour and very committed to his film and to his story. So collaborating with Peter's actually quite easy. To a lot of degree, it's the swapping of ideas, but to a greater degree, the ideas just flow out of his head like a machine gun. He just has no shortage of ideas whatsoever, so you can spring from those. For directors, it's very hard to know exactly what's going to work in a story while they're shooting, and it's very good if they can get a number of alternatives, and Pete's great at that too. He shoots his scene in such a way that he can have alternatives in the cutting room, so that later on, after he's had a lot of time to think about it, he can actually push the film in a certain direction that maybe wasn't obvious in the first place.
Peter created a terrific atmosphere for actors to work in on the set. He was absolutely focused on the content of a scene, I found, and that was very supportive of actors, particularly if it was a difficult scene, like some of the more emotional scenes. And I think everybody somehow fell under the spell of the storytelling.
To St. Valentine.
The schoolgirls were cast both in New South Wales and Victoria and South Australia. And Peter and I flew over to South Australia, and the SAFC had organised a casting session. And so girls came and went, but they had to look right.
Peter, in casting the movie, looked for, in the girls, a feeling of period.
So he was always looking to add some extra dimension, to find something else in them, physically, in their look, in their attitude, in their physicality.
Actually, Anne wasn't the first choice for the role. Somebody else was. A girl called Ingrid Mason, who was quite different to Anne.
During rehearsals, I remember Peter came to Helen and I and said, look, this is not really working, and I think we ought to bite the bullet. And he took us to a photograph of the girls assembled. He said, this is the one. And clearly she was. And he was pointing at Anne Lambert.
She did carry a kind of aura with her, and I think that it was a question of the role suiting the person and the person inhabiting the role.
I had to do a huge band-aid on the original girl, and did talk her into coming into the film as one of the senior girls.
I don't really think it's surprising that she is such an iconic presence, because I think the film absolutely focuses on that, builds that, supports that. She's a goddess. She is, you know, Aphrodite, as Martin Sharp used to say. This film is about the birth of Venus in Australia.
Black horse, white horse, brown horse, grey.
Anne was just that presence all the time. She became Miranda, and she was Miranda for all of us.
Someday, Sarah, you shall have to come home with me to the station, to Queensland, and meet my sweet, funny family for yourself.
I was so different to her. She seemed like such a, you know, natural and loving, warm, kind of sunny, uncomplicated kind of person. And when I think back to that time, I was so shy and hypersensitive, and yes, we were quite different. I met Joan Lindsay only twice. The first time, I was coming down the Rock for lunch, and I'd had a fairly upsetting experience, just not getting it right, or feeling like I hadn't been getting it right in a scene that I was doing. And so I was actually heading off on my own just to have a moment. And I became aware that there was someone coming after me across this quite rough ground, and it was this little old lady who I just knew had to be Joan. So I stopped and waited for her, and she just came straight up to me and threw her arms around me and held me really hard, and right into my ear said, "Oh, Miranda, it's been so long," and was very moved and emotional, and held on to me for a long time. It made me feel a lot better on two counts. First, that it was right that I should be playing the part, that she recognised that, and that felt good. But also it made me think that something true and profoundly felt is in the story. You know, it's about something that happened to her that even in her old age still carried a terrific punch for her.
I first met Joan Lindsay, fittingly, at the Rock, and it was about the second day of filming, I think, and midsummer, very hot. There I was, corseted and stockinged and gloved as Mamselle, and I'd gone under some trees to find some shade while they were doing the next setup, and I heard a voice say, "Bonjour, Mamselle." Turned around and there was Joan Lindsay, and we conversed for a while in French. She kept me on my toes. It was as if she saw past the actor playing the role and was talking to the character that she had created. So there was this sense of her very connected to her own imaginative world, which was being brought to life in this film.
Most of the cast carried their characters off the set. So Rachel, as Mrs. Appleyard, really was the headmistress 24 hours a day. Helen Morse, equally, was this terrific sort of centred, calm individual in the eye of the storm. And she was as much off camera as she was on camera.
The girls loved her too, and that was another thing. And they did believe that she was, you know, their French mistress.
You couldn't help but fall in love with her. She was just one of those people at a particular time in her life, and she was irresistible.
I remember Peter came to Helen and I and said, look, I've got this fellow by the name of Martin Sharp who I'd like to have involved on the film. I'd like you to meet him. So we met him, and Martin's knowledge of the book was absolutely encyclopedic. He knew every facet.
He had quite a relationship with Joan, and perhaps understood more about the script than anyone else.
He was probably the most obsessed with that story. He lived and breathed it. He became so obsessed with the story, he didn't sleep or eat. He couldn't do those things. He just had to keep on connecting with the next moment or the next scene that was going to be shot.
He was able to talk about any aspect of the film to Peter. It was really the relationship with Peter that was important. Peter felt unthreatened enough that Martin could bring up any subject. And Martin's a spirit who tends to speak his mind, and Peter's a spirit who has the ability to accept people's views.
He brought an extra level of finesse to every shot and every prop and every brooch and hat and carriage, etc. The Martin would think, oh, why don't we put that there? That just kind of lifted it.
As for the look of the thing, and certainly in relation to feeding that special atmosphere, he had a lot to do with that. Just an extraordinary attention to detail, you know, and that sort of artist sensibility, so that as an actor you'd go to open a drawer in your room and there would be the things that she would have had, and the things would have a charge to them somehow. They'd work for you, you know, and that's something an artist, I think, understands, and he fed that into every space. And when the girls finally go up into that sort of crevice, which is the last time you see them, it was a sort of quite a meaningful moment for us in the filming. And it was funny for me because when I sort of went up into that crevice, there was Martin kind of holding his hand out to sort of help you through into the other side, into wherever.
Funny. Load up my watch isn't stopped. Dead on 12 o'clock.
Strange things did happen around the rock, and it could be magnetic. I think this is something that's said in the film, and it could easily be. I tried not to think about it too much in case everybody refused to go up there.
The rock has this mystical power about it.
Equipment went missing and watches stopped and all of that stuff actually happened. I don't know whether that was just sort of one of those things. Watches do stop, don't they?
Stopped at 12.
I think everybody that's been there leaves feeling that there's something a little bit special and mysterious about that place.
I really love the place. I love being there. I don't find it, you know, upsetting or scary or any of that. It doesn't look like any other place you've ever been.
Gil Brealey, who was running the South Australian Film Corporation at the time, was very keen to be involved with the Peter Weir movie. And he stepped up and said, we want to invest and contribute to this film, but you've got to shoot in South Australia. But that's so, okay, well, let's see if we can find a school in South Australia. And lo and behold, we found Martindale Hall.
And we went out there, and I'll never forget turning around that corner and seeing it.
It could not have been more perfect.
I heard a story about Martindale Hall that was to do with how it came into being. Very romantic story and absolutely fitting for the film. Apparently the man who built it for a woman he loved, and he was told that the only way she would emigrate from England and live with him was if he built a replica of her home in England, which he did, and then she didn't turn up. And the most romantic part of the story is that he lost it in a gambling game, which I think's lovely.
Russell Boyd's contribution to that film is absolutely amazing. He shared Peter's vision. He knew exactly what Peter was talking about.
Peter and I did have a lot of discussions about how the film should look. One of the things we settled on, and I had always been very impressed by the Heidelberg School of Painters in Melbourne. I loved their impressionist look that they got in their paintings. And we sort of had a good hard look at a lot of those paintings, and we sort of settled on what should be a diffused, backlit sort of look, which those paintings all have that wonderful light from behind. So that gave me the opportunity to develop what was an old still photographer's ploy. I experimented with putting nets in front of the lens.
I remember he came in and one day and he said, I borrowed my wife's stockings and I'm going to just stick it over the front of the camera, which he did. And so that was that diffused look.
To find the right material for these nets, I went into David Jones' wedding department. I think I was the only bloke who'd ever been in there, actually. And I got some sideways glances too, but I asked the shop assistant to have a look at, if I could have a look at some wedding veil material. She must have thought I was nuts, I'm sure. So I selected a certain wedding veil, which is actually probably more like the grading of like a mosquito net. And I bought a couple of yards of that and bolted out the door. There was a scene in the movie which is one of the most famous scenes. It's the picnic scene just before the girls go up into the rock. And time was of the essence, as it is always in shooting a movie. But first time we went up the rock and looked at the location, I realised that only between like 12 o'clock and 1:30 sort of thing, we'd get a perfect light on the rock. So I said to them, we can only shoot this scene bit by bit. We've only got about an hour or so's window every day to shoot what was originally going to be one full day of shooting, so 8 hours. I was thinking, God, we're going to have to stretch this over 8 days. It was a big ask for me. It was my third movie. I mean, they could have fired me on the spot, saying, no, we'll get somebody who'll shoot it all at once. But fortunately, that didn't happen. But it was, light played such an incredibly important part in that film. I felt I couldn't manufacture it. I couldn't even try and recreate that beautiful light that was there for an hour a day. So fortunately, they listened to me and we were able to shoot it that way.
Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the...
The sound editing was superb. The cicadas and the birds and the bird life and just the sound of the bush and where you put it relative to the music or the girls breathing or the wind. These are very important and they can make a hell of a difference in terms of setting a mood. We were asserting that maybe it was the landscape that took these girls. So the landscape had to be alive. And as anybody that's spent any time in the Australian bush knows it is, that it's a kind of living, throbbing, and in fact quite often very noisy place. The music, the panpipe music, I mean, that was a fluke. But boy, take that out of the movie and it's like, what are Romanian panpipes doing in that movie? I don't know, but it's perfect. We were having issues with the music, we didn't quite think it was right, and then Jim said, I remember some music in a documentary on the ABC, and I'm going, well, you stop talking about music on a documentary, we've got problems with the music.
I managed to track down the original recording, and another recording. And I took them home to my house and rang Peter, and I started playing them to him, and he said, look, turn up the album. Then turn down the album, turn up the cassette. He wanted to hear the mix between the two. And so out of that came the panpipes and some other pieces. It was just a lucky stroke.
The mix of sound, music, performance, photography, story enabled us somehow to defy the odds. I'll never forget the opening night of Picnic at Hanging Rock in Sydney. I rushed to the bathroom after the screening, of course, having a nervous pee, and I heard this guy come in, and he had no idea who I was, and he said, "That is the longest, most boring film I have ever seen." And I was absolutely devastated, because, of course, I didn't see that. Every frame was perfect. I think that it is one of the most important films internationally, one of the few Australian films that people remember.
Peter, Helen and I went to Cannes, and that was our launch place, and we staged a little picnic on the beach with a dozen or so French schoolgirls dressed in our costumes, and the film was extremely well received internationally and went on to be a very big success.
That's the thing that I love about it. The Alvins and the Bazzers got us known internationally as well. But after Picnic, you had all these marvellous films.
But what remained elusive was America. In the 70s, Australian films were just not known in America at all.
Distributors in those days, it was like, an Australian film? Yeah, right.
I remember a distributor saying, well, we're going to have to revoice all of this. And so the process was slow. The film was eventually released after the last wave. It was critically well received, but the public never got to see it.
Looking back at it, I'm just sort of really delighted and proud that somehow we managed to do something that even today is still rich and interesting.
We always felt that Picnic at Hanging Rock was a special film, and there was this aura that came round the whole motion of making the film. So we knew that something special was about. We didn't realise how big it was going to be.
I think the film is still very, very current. It hasn't really dated at all because it was set in a period that will remain forever anyway. And I think the techniques used have helped to maintain its own dignity. So I think the film's quite a timeless piece, actually.
One of the things I did love about this particular story, and obviously the book, was the fact that it was kind of a female-centred film, and this is manifested in Miranda, of course, but also the fact that the story is populated with a lot of women. There's a kind of female principle, I think, being explored and manifested.
Picnic's special in a way that it allows so much to be projected onto it. Lots and lots of people have come up to me who I would probably have never spoken to, who've talked to me in a very personal way that would probably normally have taken, a good, few years of knowing them to get to, And so it's been interesting from that point of view. People talk about themselves in relation to the film, their responses, in a very personal way.
For me, I was fortunate, I was lucky. The whole experience of Picnic, from start to finish, was a extremely rewarding experience.
The themes still resonate for me. I think that's probably the most powerful thing about it as an experience, and what makes it perhaps different and special in a different way from other work I've done.
Well, look, I think the truth is that in those days, we really didn't know much at all. We were literally kids. I was like 26, 27, 28, something like that. There were no rules. So even the preconceptions were arguable.
With Picnic, I have to say everybody wanted it to succeed. We all wanted it to succeed. And I don't think I had a moment of doubt during the whole shoot that it wouldn't.